channel Wi-Fi Tech Lab. We are back again with this video tutorial. It's all about VLANs today. So we will be demonstrating how to configure VLANs from scratch. This is going to be just a simple lab, but it's going to help you understand the basic of how this is being done. Okay, so as you can see, this is the lab that is on a Cisco packet tracer. What you see now, we have two layer 2 switches. This is Cisco 2960, and then we have some multiple end-host devices. This is PC0 up to PC12 on my right hand side. And then if you pay attention, all of these pieces, they are connected to switches. And then on this side also, these pieces they are connected to this switch 2. Now if you pay attention also, they are isolated or they are grouped. If you take a look at the left hand side on VLAN 10, you can see that we have only 4 devices on this group. Okay, this is just an example. Of course, you can have many devices under that particular VLAN, but in this case, we're just using only 4 devices at the moment, and then we're only using PCs at the moment. You can use any type of end-host devices from here. It could be a server, it could be a phone, it could be IoT devices, it could be an wireless access controller, it could be an access point as well. Okay, so what you see now on this one, we also have a VLAN 20, have only like 3 devices on it, which is PC4, PC5 and PC6. If you move to the right hand side furthermore, you can also see that we have VLAN 30 that have like 3 pieces also, and then the last one we have VLAN 40. Okay, what can you tell about all of these? These devices, they are on an isolated. Okay, now what is a VLAN? Well, a VLAN is stand for Visual Local Area Network. How do we use it and why do we use it? Okay, so suppose that we have a network of 192.168.1.0/24. Okay, /24 simple means that we have the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. all right, this is our network subnet. Okay, so this is the network ID as a whole, which means we only have a usable IP address. We have usable IP address of 254. Okay, these are the addresses that we can use on this network. all right, now suppose that we have a small company or a small office, home office infrastructure where we have maximum of 254 devices or even less than that. So but what we're willing to do is we want to group each and every departments to have their own isolated network. all right, so that we are willing to break the communication from a certain department towards other department. Okay, this enhances security and also it optimizes the network performance, because as you also know that when we are sending a packet from any device toward the switch for the first time, the switch will flood the packet to each and every devices that are connected to it, except from the port or from the interface that it's receiving the packet from. In this case, it wouldn't flood it to other VLANs as well, except from the VLAN or the broadcasting domain where it came from. But we're gonna see that now. So we're willing to divide, or we're willing to segregate, or we're willing to segment the network into smaller groups. all right, as you can see, we have VLAN 10, we have VLAN 20, we have VLAN 30 and VLAN. The reason why we use different colors. In this scenario, we are trying to make sure that no communication will be formed between the device in this department and this department and this department, right? We don't want the packet to break out from here towards this side and then here towards this side. So if you send an ICMP echo request, you won't get a reply with the time to live from this department. And also, if you are on this department trying to reach out to VLAN 30, you won't get any echo replies. All right, okay, let's get into it. So what we're gonna do now, we just wanna break down this network into smaller networks. Before I come to layer 3 or IP addressing, I'm just gonna talk about layer 2. Okay, I'm just gonna talk about the VLANs. All right, how do we create the VLANs now? To create the VLANs, we need to log into the switch that we're willing to configure the VLANs on. All right, in this case, we are using a layer 2. So we are configuring VLANs on the device that is closer to end host devices. In this case, we will be using this one as our access. Okay, this is an access layer. So what we're gonna do now, we're just gonna click on this switch and I'll navigate to its command line interface. Okay, as we all know, I'm just gonna move this a bit, or let me just do this. Let me move it this side and then I'll just enlarge it and then I'll scroll down. Okay, so I'm just gonna pay attention on this left hand side for now. Whatever I'll do on this side, I will do on this side as well, on the other side. So pay attention. We have two groups in here. We have VLAN 10 and then we have VLAN 20. Suppose we're willing to give this a name of maybe what department? Let's say this is just IT department. All right, you may just call it IT department. All right, and suppose this one we just willing to call it a human resource department. I'll call it HR department. All right, and then this one, suppose we're willing to call it finance department, and then let's call it finance department. Okay, and then of course this one, the last one, what else can we call it? Let's just call it main office. All right, or maybe let's just call it procurement. All right, okay, I'm just gonna give it some color so that people will be able to see it. Let me just do this. Okay, I hope you're still following. Okay, let's come to this switch. This is switch 1. First thing I want to do, as we all know, in order for us to be able to configure a switch, we must enable it in this case. And then from this we are on a privileged config mode. Now we need to navigate to a global config mode by typing the command config terminal, configuration terminal. Okay, let's just do this. Config T to make it easy for you. All right, so once we navigate to a global config mode, our main mission on this lab, we're willing to configure VLANs. We already tried to explain why we're using VLANs. So what we're willing to configure here is the name. Let's start by configure the name. VLAN. Okay, this is VLAN 10. Again, 10 stands for the ID. All right, if I can do this, it can give me the options of the configuration. I can type under the VLAN configuration interface. So I'm willing to give it a name. All right, what I'll do now, I'll just type in name IT underscore department. Okay, and then I'll just say exit. All right, and also I will create another VLAN. So what I'm doing now, actually, I'm just creating VLANs and then I'm giving them the name. All right, so I will say this is VLAN 20, and then I'm willing to give it a name of HR department. Okay, I need to put the underscore in here in between. Okay, and then I'll just exit. All right, now if I run the command do show VLAN, I'll be able to see which VLANs are configured on this switch. All right, so what you will see now, you will see that this is the VLAN ID that we have, which is VLAN 10 and VLAN 20. Along them we have the name, which is IT department, and also we have HR department. Okay, these VLANs, they are active. All right, what else do we know about these VLANs? We know that each and every interfaces that are on the switch, they still belong to default VLAN, which is a VLAN 1. Okay, this is the ID 1. All right, so which means all of these devices now, they still on the same or on the default configuration on the switch. Okay, so which means we still have to associate these devices with this VLAN, and also we need to associate these devices logically with this VLAN. All right, so how do we do that now? So we have to use a command to select the interfaces that we're willing to associate. So you can do this by selecting one by one interface, but if those devices, they are plugged on a consecutive ports or interfaces, for instance, if you check on this side, this is fastnet 01, this is fastnet 02, this is fastnet 03, and this is 4. So they following each other respectively. Okay, so which means I can use another command which says interface range fast ethernet 0 1 0/1 up to the last number, which is 4. Okay, this is the last interface of this device, PC3. All right, so which means this PC is connected to the port 4 on the switch. So what I'm willing to do now, I'm willing to associate all of these ports logically to be part of VLAN 10. So I'm logically dividing the ports on the switch. I'm saying these particular ports, I want them to be associated with this specific VLAN ID. Okay, so all I have to further do is type in the command switch port mode access. Okay, and then I will just say switch port access VLAN 10. Now I'm telling all of those interface to be part of VLAN 10 because here we were just selecting them. This is just saying, hey, you and you and you. Okay, I want you to be part of VLAN 10. All right, now let's press enter, and then if you pay attention, all of these interfaces, they are starting. What does this mean? Which means they are getting ready to be part of different VLAN ID, because as default they were part of VLAN ID 1. Now they are gonna be VLAN ID 10. Okay, so as we move along we will talk about VXLAN, but for now let's talk about Cisco CCNA basic simple labs. Okay, now this is VLAN 10. So if I run that command again, do show VLAN, and this time let me say 10, or sorry, let me just say VLAN. What I will be able to see here, I will be able to see that we have separated this interface from the default VLAN. So which means now in a default VLAN, these interfaces, they are no longer associated with the default VLAN. Now they are part of this department. They are part of IT department. And then you will also see that I will take these ones and then I will associate them with this department, HR department, with VLAN 20. Let's do that now. Okay. I have to exit from here. Because this is still the same switch, I will run the same command. We already created the VLAN and the VLAN name. All we need to do now, we need to select the interfaces the same way that we have selected the interface for IT department. So let's look again which are these interfaces that we're going to be selecting. So it's Fastnet 05, and then also this is Fast 06, and this is also, sorry about that, let's grab this one. This is Fastnet 07. All right. So which means when we come here on this switch, we need to specify the range, which is Fast 05. Let me double check. So it's Fast 05. If you look in here, and then I will just say switch mode access, and then now I will say switch mode access VLAN 20. This time we're going to use the different VLAN ID. Why? Because if I were to use VLAN 10, which means I'm logically grouping all of these devices to VLAN 10. Okay. So I'm just going to use 20, and then I'll just exit, and then I'll run the other command which says do show VLAN. Okay, I'll just maximize this. Now if you pay attention, we only have this one. Do you realize why we only have this one? It's because on our range we didn't specify 7. We didn't use I'll just show you now. We didn't use this to specify that we're willing to start from Fastnet 05 up to 7. I was just showing you how and why this is important to never forget. Okay, now let's come back, and then we associate the rest of the interfaces with that particular VLAN. All we need to do is to run the command again, or at this time we can start from Fastnet 0/6 to 7, and then from here we can run the same command over and over again. Switch mode access VLAN 20, switch port access VLAN 20. Okay, exit. Do right. This is to save our configuration. So if I type in the command do show VLAN, I'll be able to see now that we have these 3 devices. In this case, if I move along, you will notice that these are the devices that we have connected or logically associated with VLAN 20 ID. Okay. Now we're gonna be doing the same thing. We're gonna be doing the same thing on the right hand side. Okay. Let's do it on the right hand side. I will just minimize this one. I will come to the switch. I will select the command line interface. Remember, we're using a Cisco packet tracer. If you were to use this in real life, you would be using a console cable. Plug it directly to the switch console port. Now I will type in the command config terminal, and then now that I've elevated myself to global config mode, I will just try to move this side so that I will be able to show you this side. Okay, what do you see now? You will see switch 2, and then you also see that we have VLAN 30, VLAN 40 directly connected to switch 2. We not gonna be doing anything different from the other. We will be just doing the same thing. Remember, the first thing that we did, we just configured VLAN. To create a VLAN, we need to type the name of that VLAN with a VLAN ID. So we're just gonna say VLAN 30, and then we have to type in the name. Name is not compulsory, but to make it simple for you to always recognize the devices associated with the name or alias name that you're given, it is easy for you, so you must just configure it. So I'll just call it finance department. Okay, and then I will just exit. Now this is not case sensitive. I can always use uppercase and smaller cases as well. Now let's go to VLAN 40. I'll give it also a name. In this case, I'll just call it procurement. Department. I will exit. Now if I do show VLAN, I will be able to see that we have VLAN that are created recently. We have VLAN 1, which is a default VLAN. You must know the default VLAN is always 1. Now after that, we have created other VLANs manually. We need to associate some interfaces of our choice out of all of these interfaces on the switch. In this case, we will be using from 1 to 3 on this department, on finance department. So let me just do that now. Interface range F01 to 3. I want to type in the command switch port mode access. Switch port access VLAN 30. Exit. Now if I type in the command again, do show VLAN, I will be able to see that these are the devices. These are the 3 interfaces that are associated with VLAN 30. Now I'm willing to associate these 2 devices also, which is 505, and obviously this is 6. I want to associate these 2 devices with VLAN 40. So I'll type in the command interface range fast Ethernet 0, 5 up to 6. Okay, let's double check. This is 5 up to 6, of course. So I will type that command again, switch port mode access. Switch port access VLAN 40. Do right. Okay. Exit. Now I can also check now and see if we're gonna see these two interfaces being associated with the procurement department. This is the VLAN ID, which is 40. Okay. This is incomplete. Let's say exit. Show run. Now we are checking the configuration that we've been doing. This is the interface fastnet01. As you can see, it's associated with VLAN 30, which is this one. And then this is two associated also with VLAN 30, which is this one. And then we have this one, the third one, which is associated with VLAN 30. Now 4 is not in here, it's not configured because it's not available in here. Alright, and then we have this one, fastnet05, which is associated with VLAN 40. If you look on the right hand side on the procurement department, you will see that we have VLAN 40. Now look closer also on the last device, which is fastnet06 interface. We also have VLAN 40, and then it's also part of procurement department. The rest of the interfaces on this switch, they are not configured. But how do we also check that? We can run a command which says do show IP interface brief. Okay. This command will show us exactly what is going on the switch interfaces. Each switch interface, we will be able to see if it's up, down, administratively down, okay, and which VLANs are in there. Okay, now let's see. We have this one. This is fastnet01, which is up. Fastnet02, 3, they are also up, and then 5, 6, they are up, and 8 is also up. But we haven't touched 8. The reason why, we're just gonna touch upon it now. And then also all of these devices, they are down. Okay, they are down. Now let's talk about this cable. Remember, on a previous video we have mentioned that we have a type of cable that we use to connect our devices. In this case, we've been using a standard cable or straight through cable to connect the end-host devices to a switch. Okay, now we have this crossover cable to connect from the device of the same type to another device of the same type. So switch to switch, we will using a crossover cable. Now when we check on switch 2, we found that this interface is up, but we haven't configured actually anything on it. So in this case, we first need to talk about it. This interface, we would like to call it trunk. Trunk on Aruba switches, it means something different. But in Cisco, trunk simply means that this is like a channel which encapsulates the .1Q tag, which means we will be sending multiple packets from different interfaces at once, from different VLANs in this one interface. So it is capable of transmitting or let pass through the different packets of different VLANs on this cable towards another device. Okay, so think of it as something like a channel. It's not really a channel, but think of it as a channel. Okay, and these channels, sorry about that, this channel carries different packets that come from different VLANs. Let's put it like VLAN 10. It could be VLAN 20. It could be a packet that comes from VLAN 30. It could be a packet that comes from VLAN 40. Okay. All right, so this is the trunk. So we need to configure the trunk ports. This is our trunk port now, because we're willing to send information from this side to that side and from this side to that side, if only we can. So there is a command that we have to configure on the switches, which will allow the devices to communicate from different VLAN. But we can only be able to do that on layer 3 devices. So once we introduce layer 3 devices, we'll be able to communicate the devices of different VLAN by using something called SVI or interface routing. Okay, now what we're willing to do, we're willing to start from switch 1, enable config terminal, interface fastnet 080/8, switch port trunk, switch port mode trunk. We're no longer gonna be using switch port mode access in this case, in this scenario, because access can only carries one type of packet, or I can say one VLAN packet. Okay, so as you can see, the interface was down, now it's up. All right, this interface is resetting. Now let's save this by typing the command do writes or copy run start config mode. Let's come on this one and do the same thing. There is a spanning tree happening. It's blocking on this side because there is a loop. Okay, so we already talked about spanning tree. You can always go back to previous videos to see exactly how does it happen, but in this case, to make it work, we will need to configure this interface also on this side by typing the command switch port mode trunk, exit, no shut, exit, do write. Okay, as you can see now, we have that green indication, which means we are ready to go. So we have finally configured the VLANs. All we have to do is to run some tests now to see if these devices on this department will be able to communicate with this department and also with this department. What we're expecting is that the devices on this side will not be able to communicate with the devices on here, and the devices from here are not going to be able to communicate with any other department on this lab. Okay, because there is no interface or inter-VLAN routing. Okay, so let's give it a manual IP addresses. 192.168.1.2 up to 192.168. Let me just say .5. Okay, these are the IP addresses that I'll be using manually on these devices network interface cards. I'm just gonna click any of these devices and then I'll navigate to this IP configuration. I'll use a static IP addresses in this case because we didn't include any DHCP server. But as we go along with this lab, we're gonna be using a DHCP, so you'll be able to see how the DHCP works. How is it leasing the IP addresses to the client devices? So let's come here and type in the command 192.168.1.2. This is the host IP addresses that can be used by any devices in the network. In this case, I'm just gonna use a default gateway, but in this case it's not necessary because we're not willing to break out of the internet. We're using the local area network, we're not willing to break out, but I'm just gonna configure it anyway. I'm gonna suppose that my DNS is the Google DNS. We're using IPv4 to demonstrate this, but as we move along, we'll be using IPv6 also. This is the link local address. Okay, we will be using a global unicast on an upcoming videos. Okay, now let's just save this and then let's move along to another one. 192.168.1.3. In this case, I'm just gonna leave this without a default gateway, and also I'm just gonna come to this one. I'll call it 192.168.1.3.4. I'll leave it as it is, and then I will come to this one. I'll type in the command 192.168.1.5. Let me put the default gateways. Okay. Even though they are not necessary at this point, but let me just put it anyway. I'm just gonna move to this side, and then I will also do the same thing. I'll copy this, I'll paste it over this side, and this time I'm willing to make them start from 33 up to 36. 192.168.1.33, 192.168.1. Okay, let me make this as 192.168.1 dot 33. Let me start by 34. And then I'll just take the last one. I will only use 2 devices on this department to demonstrate. 192.168.1.35. 192.168.1.33. Okay, I'm just gonna move along to the other side as well. Okay, 60. I'll start from 67 on this one up to 66, up to 68. In this case, I'm just gonna give this an IP address of 192.168.1.67. 192.168.1.65. If you pay attention, each and every default gateway of a different VLAN group, I'm using a separate default gateway. The reason why, if you look up on pay attention, the default gateway here I used 1, on the other one I used 33, and another one I'm using 65. This simply means that on my mind I've logically divided these interfaces to use this subnet, which is 255.255.255.224. Okay, it's only allowed 30 usable IP addresses on its range. Okay, now let's come to this one, the last one. I will do the same thing. 192.168.1.68. 192.168.1.65. 8.8.8.8. Okay. On the last one also, let's give it 96, 97, and this one from 97 up to 99. In this case, I'm just gonna say 192.168.1.97, 192.168.1.96. Eight. Okay, let's do this. Okay, we have successfully configured these interfaces manually. Okay, all we have to do now is run some tests and find out if it works according what we expect or not. Okay, now let's run some tests. Let's start by this side. I'm just gonna put this in real time. So what we're willing to do is we're willing to try and ping. We're willing to try and ping PC3, PC6, PC9, and PC12. Our expectation is to be able to ping PC3 but not PC2. But not PC6. We can also not ping PC9 and PC12. Okay. Now let's run a ping. Ping 192.168. What is the IP address in here? We need to find it out now by coming on here and then say IP config. This is how you find your IP address on your PC. IP config. You open the command line prompt and then you type this command, IP config. You'll be able to see your host IP address. You'll be able to see your subnet mask. You'll be also able to see the default gateway. You can also further see your DNS. Okay. Let's see if it's gonna be able to show all of the configurations. You'll be able to also see your DNS server. You'll be able to see which DHCP server is leasing your IP address. In this case, we haven't configured any DHCP server. Okay. Now we have got this 35 which we are trying to ping. So I'm willing to ping it from PC0. I'll ping 135. I'm expecting to get nothing. Timeouts, sessions. The reason why I cannot be able to ping is because this device is on a different department than this one. It wouldn't matter even if I were to put this as my default gateway. I will still not be able to ping it successfully. Even though on the network interface I've specified that my default gateway point me to the default gateway that is used by IT department, I'm still getting nothing. Why? Because these are on a different broadcasting domain, and this one also have different broadcasting domain. Okay, just gonna do that. This is a different broadcasting domain. This is a different broadcasting domain. Okay, let me use different colors. This is a different broadcasting domain. This is also a different broadcasting domain. This is also a different broadcasting domain. This itself is a different broadcasting domain. Okay. Now, which means if we're trying to send something to this PC, we should be able to get the time to live. Okay, let's ping 1.5 from this computer. This computer is on a single, they're sharing a single broadcasting domain. So I'll type in the command ping 192.168.1.5. All I'm expecting is to get the time to live. As you also can see, I'm getting the time to live. Okay, I can reach the device because they are on the same broadcasting domain. Okay, even though these devices, they are on the same switch, remember we have logically divided now every port on the switch. We have separated, we have associated some interface ports on the switch to be associated with different VLANs, VLAN 10, VLAN 20 in switch 1. Okay, now what if I were to change this device? As you can see, I want to associate it with this VLAN. It will have its IP address, but I want to associate it with this VLAN. Let's see that now. This is the interface that I want to change. I want to put it here, but I will leave it here. It's fastened to 06. So I'll come back to this switch. And then I will say config terminal. I will select this interface that I'm willing to move 0/6. Switch port mode, access, switch port, access, VLAN 10, exit, do show VLAN. What can we see now? Let's go back to our VLAN 10. We can see that VLAN 10 have a new member that have recently joined. So we're expecting to be able to ping this IP address now. Okay. So what is the IP address that is configured on this device? There's nothing. Let's just give it 192.168. Let's say 35, or maybe let's say 36, 1.36. Or maybe 39. Default gateway is, let's just not put a default gateway, let's leave it as it is. So from here I would like to ping that 192.168.1.39. As you can see, we are getting live. Right, we're getting echo replies. Although this device is still here, but we have logically removed it from VLAN 20 to VLAN 10. Now it is associated with VLAN 10, which means even if there are physical division on the department, whenever we move a device logically and associate it with a different VLAN ID, it will be part of that VLAN logically. As you have seen that the device physically is located on this department, but logically we have removed it from this VLAN 20 and associated with VLAN 10 so that it will be able to communicate with other devices on VLAN 10 on IT department. As you can see, we have got the replies. If we do a trace route of this 192.168, it is directly connected to the switch, so it's just one hop away. Okay, now this is exactly how the VLANs is being configured on this switch. Okay, now suppose that we're willing to send something over this trunk to this side. In order to do that, we will have to configure one of these devices, remove it logically and associate it in one of these VLANs. Let's suppose we're willing to take this device and then we're willing to associate it with this department, which is on VLAN 20. How are we going to do that? So all we have to do is we will have to create a VLAN ID 20 on this switch. Config terminal. We have to create a VLAN 20 on this switch. Doesn't matter if we give it a name, we can just leave it as it is. And then all we have to do is we have to type in the command interface F06 switch port mode access, switch port mode access VLAN 20. Do right. What we're doing is, as you can see, it's resetting the interface. What we're doing, we're logically saying, I want you, specifically you, I want you to be part of this, I want you to be part of this broadcasting domain, the green broadcasting domain, which is this one. Okay, this one. So which means if I'm trying to ping from this device to that device, they must be able to communicate. And then from that device to this device, they must be able to communicate. Okay. Exit. Okay. Let's say interface fast Ethernet 0/6. Let's see which commands that we can run. Switch port incomplete. Switch port mode trunk. Mode. Okay. Now let's do that now. We already know the IP address of this device. It is 99. And then from here, it is 35. So let's ping 35 from here now. Ping 192.168.1.35. As you can see, we can be able to ping from this device to any of these devices on VLAN 20, because on this device we have a broadcasting domain which have this group, this this HR department, and then from here, although the device was on the procurement, and then we remove it logically, and we are isolated it so that we'll be able to group it with this department. Okay, on an upcoming video we gonna be configuring inter-VLAN routing so that we'll be able to see how exactly layer 3 works, okay, in particular associated with VLANs. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope this was informative to you. Okay, let's see each other on an upcoming video.